Recycle it. Bottles and cans. Recycle it. Lend a hand.
Since the introduction of curbside recycling in the 1980s, recycling has been hailed as the answer to our environmental woes. And while the system was never perfect, it evolved into a vast global economy worth around $200 billion. For 3 decades, the U.S. sent ships full of plastic waste to China. Chinese plants would then recycle this waste to use in the production of new products. For the U.S., this was cheaper than recycling domestically. And for China, there was a high demand from the booming manufacturing sector. But on December 31st, 2017, China suddenly closed its borders to 24 categories of recyclable waste. It threw the U.S. into a recycling crisis. As China's economy had grown, it began producing more virgin plastic and had more plastic of its own to recycle. No longer did it need to import plastic waste, and high-income countries that had relied on China for decades had a big problem.
Towns are struggling to deal with piles of plastic, paper, scrap metal, and other materials with no clear destination.
The move has created a crisis for recyclers here, now facing mountains of materials they can't get rid of.
In response, the US, Europe, and Japan began distributing plastic waste to a wider net of poor countries. And basically overnight, Southeast Asian nations became the world's largest importers of plastic scrap. From January to November 2018, Malaysia imported about 435 million pounds of plastic scrap, just from the US. Imports of plastic trash doubled in Vietnam and increased by a whopping 1,370% in Thailand. This massive increase in waste imports has left countries like Malaysia scrambling and overwhelmed. A University of Georgia study found that Malaysia mismanaged 55% of its own plastic waste. These inefficiencies have only been magnified as imports have increased.
The plastic that cannot be recycled, it will just end up in open burning, also dump it in some rural area, such as landfill.
Heng Kia Chun is a Greenpeace activist based in Malaysia. He sees the effects firsthand.
And that is why it causes water and also soil pollutions. In some illegal facility that processing plastic waste, local community members were complaining about the increased risk of the air pollutions because the illegal operator didn't complying with all these environmental regulations.
The result has been devastating on local towns. Illegal factories burn non-recyclable waste by the container, filling the air with toxic chemicals like mercury, dioxins, and polychlorinated biphenyls. Residents in Jerome told BBC they experienced rashes and violent coughing attacks. The Malaysian government has been cracking down on these factories, but in their wake, mountains of trash remain, seeping into the soil and contaminating waterways, like this one outside of Kuala Lumpur. In January 2020, Malaysia said that they had had enough. Malaysian Environmental Minister Yao Yin said that they were going to send plastic shipping containers back to the U.S.
There are people that would like to see this as the rubbish downside of the world you dream on. So we will send back.
As of January 20th, 2020, Malaysia had sent 150 containers back to their 13 countries of origin since the third quarter of 2019. For a long-term solution, Malaysia is backing a 2018 proposal from Norway that aims to add plastic scrap to the list of materials covered by the Basel Convention. The 1992 treaty regulates the movement of hazardous waste between countries. It was specifically designed to prevent developed countries from sending their waste to less developed countries. But plastic waste isn't on the list. Experts say that the recycling crisis has been a much-needed reality check for Americans. Shipping containers full of waste arriving on our shores could force the American government to reinvest in domestic recycling and instate further anti-plastic legislation.
So in order to solve this crisis, we really need to go upstream and already start thinking about, how do we even bring products to people without creating all of this waste?
Sarah Wingstrand is a program manager for the New Plastics Economy at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
Today, we design super complicated plastic packaging. So we might even have several types of layers of different materials, different types of plastic all glued together. We need to fundamentally rethink how we create or make the plastic in the first place in order to make sure that it actually can be kept in loop.
The world's recycling economy has been forever changed. No longer can nations turn a blind eye to the plastic waste that piles up in faraway landfills. After decades of recycling campaigns that have failed to get people to recycle more, high-income nations need to take responsibility for their own mess.